Welcome! Today I'm going to show you how to automate a Twitter bot using observable and endpoint services. So this bot is going to tweet out the top trending notebook once a day. But you can use this technique to automate anything, data collection, tweeting, whatever you need to do on a daily schedule. First thing, we're going to import the Cron library from Endpoint Services Cron. So Cron is able to call a URL endpoint. So the other piece of infrastructure we'll need is a serverless cell, which allows us to create a HTTP handler defined within a notebook. So we import the serverless cells deploy function and we call deploy, which will set up a HTTP handler, and we'll need to do some work inside this HTTP handler. It will send out a tweet, but we don't know the details of how that will work quite yet. For our application, we wish to display the top trending notebook. So the first step is finding out how the observable website actually displays its trending notebooks. When we browse through the Chrome Network tab, when it's rendering that page, we see an interesting request to trending page 1. So we take that whole request URL and try doing it in our notebook. We find it fails, so we have a look in the console and see that endpoint doesn't support cross-origin requests. That's an easy fix. We just use a CORS proxy to do the request instead. This CORS proxy is identical signature to fetch. It's implemented in serverless cells, which is another interesting feature about serverless cells. They don't have any CORS restrictions. So now we can get a response, and first we check its status code. It looks good, so then we can expand the payload. It looks good, so we conditionally expand the payload if the response status is 200. So now we can get the top trending result by taking the first element of the array in the payload. This object has lots of interesting properties which we'll use to build a tweet. First thing, we'll try and extract the thumbnail image. Now the thumbnail property is just a strange number, but when we look at the observable website, we see that that code is part of the image URL. So we can create our own template for reconstructing the full URL to that image. Then we can create a HTML image pointing to that image URL. And ta-da, we can see the image of the top trending notebook. So the next thing is to make the tweet body. So I'll draw inspiration from how the share to Twitter button works on the observable website. It's very useful using observables autocomplete on cell properties to figure out what all the available properties are for the trending result. Use tab to bring up that menu. Now we know what to tweet. We have to figure out how to tweet it. For this, I'm going to use Endpoint Services Zapier Integration. Zapier can do lots of different things: tweet, email, write to a spreadsheet. It's really a bag of very useful integrations. The Zapier integration revolves around creating a trigger to a zap. These triggers are functions that allow you to pass a payload to Zapier. Part of the configuration is specifying an example of what one of those payloads look like. For us, it will be the tweet text and image. The other important configuration is the check payload function, which is the backbone of the security model. Check payload is called twice, once client side in the notebook when the trigger is called, and a second time in the serverless cell that receives the request to send the payload. Critically, the server-side check payload can't be tampered with. We wish to prevent malicious actors from using our bot account to send tweets, arbitrary tweets. For us, it's enough to check that the text in the tweet matches the top trending text. So now we wire up this trigger to a zap in the Zapier platform. We create a secure channel by using a public and secret key. The public key goes in the trigger definition in the public notebook. We use the secret key to authenticate with Zapier. In the Zapier notebook, there's a invite link. This allows you to create a Zap triggered by something that happens on observable. We want something to happen when a cell trigger fires. We authenticate the connection using the secret key. Normally you would keep this secret, but it doesn't matter for this recording because there's no sensitive information being transferred. The Zapier integration needs the notebook ID. So we quickly name this notebook and turn on link sharing. Once that's keyed into Zapier, it should be able to look up your sample automatically. So it's discovered a cell trigger called send tweet, and the sample data is even populated with the currently top trending notebook information. The action of the Zap, we want it to actually send a tweet now. So we authenticate Zapier with Twitter. And then we configure that action using the data extracted from our payload. And when you click on test, it'll actually execute the action. And ta-da, we actually see the tweet in my timeline. Zapier did some growth hack and BS though with the URL, so I reconfigure that tweet a little to not do the Zapier URL shortening. So now we expose the send tweet function as a externally callable URL using a serverless cell. We want that URL to return OK200 and to actually call the send tweet trigger using the data scrape from the observable website. The serverless cell deploy function returns a link which we can just click and check it all works in the browser. For our application, we want to call this URL on a schedule once a day. So we import the create cron function from Endpoint Services cron notebook. We configure it to fire once a day. The syntax for cron schedules is a bit weird, so I generally just look them up on the internet. We will set ours to fire 15 minutes past noon. And then we configure the URL it should call. I initially made a mistake by having the cron reference the result of a other serverless cell deploy. Serverless cells aren't allowed to deploy other serverless cells when executing. This is a deliberate loop breaking strategy. So instead you just have to hard code the URL. Before a cron will update, you have to publish a notebook and then call update, and it will set the desired schedule. Once the cron updates, that's it. It's on a schedule. That URL will be called, and in turn that will send a tweet, and the tweet data is based on data scraped from the observable website. Thanks very much for watching. I hope that gives you some ideas. You can obviously use Zapier for a lot more than just sending tweets. You can use Cron for a lot more than just automating tweet bots. I think it might be useful to observable users to use it to collect data and things like that on a regular schedule. Hope you enjoy using it. Check out all our different services at Endpoint Services on the observable platform, and good luck to you.